thing. Okay, so that seems to be good. Okay. I'm going to assume this is working, and if my coworker who's helping to watch this comes along and says it's not, I will intervene as best I can. So, as I was saying, this is our third in our virtual live stream talks. This one's in plain sight. And it's going to be an unusual one because this one is both on the topic it is, but it's also the concept of researching a topic, which is important for librarians to discuss because we get questions all day about how do I research a topic, and sometimes it's a simple answer and occasionally it's a complex answer. And in this case, the answer was how do I research conspiracy theories, and it turned out to be a complex answer. So just to give some background, let me oh, there we go. So how it started. How it started was I was curious about conspiracy theories. And I was curious about conspiracy theories for a number of reasons, which we'll get into, and some of the information and research coming out talking about how conspiracy theories were increasing and what kind of impacts and stuff they were having. Okay, yep, just checking because for some reason my screen froze up on YouTube, but that's fine. All right, so the basic initial idea I had for the talk was, welcome to this conspiracy age, and it was going to be a talk about how the internet and conspiracy theories are going hand in hand and how they're crisscrossing and the sort of impact and effect that was having, right? And we were going to be looking at this sort of initial structure for the talk. I was going to discuss what a conspiracy theory is with the kind of definite details. We're going to look at some classic conspiracy theories going all the way back, hundreds and hundreds of years, and the way that certain things echo and repeat. I was going to talk about some misconceptions about conspiracy theories, both good and bad misconceptions, and then I was going to show some definite data. Like there was going to be this sort of definite structure to my talk. And the reason why is because you see reports like this. This is a 2020 NPR Ipsos poll where they polled people and asked them how do they respond and believe to certain things. And as you can see, you get things like 40% of people responded that they thought COVID-19 was created in a lab in China, and 29% people said they just weren't sure. So the vast majority believed the conspiracy, at least amongst the people that were being polled here. But when you look at even kind of older hat, more the kind of conspiracies that show up time and time again, like a group of Satan-worshipping elites who operating a child sex rings are in control of our politics and media. 47% of people said it was false. 70% said it was true, but you had this big gap of people who said they just didn't know, which is possibly a good answer for any time you have this kind of behind-the-scenes things, but still. And so you had this sort of data, right? Like all these articles coming out that was like, oh, we're in the rise of conspiracy theories. We're in the golden age of conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories are thriving in the endemic. The internet is driving conspiracy theories. And so if you search for the terms like the rise of conspiracy theories, increasing conspiracy theories, and the internet, you saw plenty of articles that had this kind of headline. But, because there is a but here. So we now move into the part 2, which is how this talk has changed over time, because I have spent the last period of time, week plus, reading lots and lots of stuff about conspiracy theories, trying to dig deeper into the older and more sort of cornerstone articles, looking at the newer research, and things have changed. And so there's a little bit of this beginning is the concept of framing your research to understand how sort of your inherent biases you bring to your research impact how much the research agrees with your inherent biases, if that makes sense. And a alternate subtitle for this section is, or how a librarian learns his humility, right? Because if you frame the question, conspiracy theories are not increasing, you find probably not just as many because it doesn't sell as well, but you find plenty of articles, both from the academic, from the journalists, from the blogging, from all sorts of sides that say the exact opposite. Conspiracy theories are just a part of history. They've been continuous. The one article down there in the bottom, are conspiracy beliefs on the rise? In a word, no. So a lot of researchers are actually reporting that conspiracy theories are prevalent. They're very loud right now. But there's no actual connection to the internet is not itself driving conspiracy theories forward. It might be more or less just kind of bringing them more to the foresight. So Karen Douglas, in a podcast for the American Psychological Association, was talking about this, and I'll just read out some of these quotes in this kind of word dump of a page. But, she says, "It is the definite case that conspiracy theories have always been with us. Believing in conspiracy theories and being suspicious about the actions of others in some ways is quite an adaptive thing to do. I guess you could just call everybody a conspiracy theorist if you want to use that term at one point or another. This is just the way we are wired up to some degree." It's difficult. So basically, and then when asked, are conspiracy theories on the rise, she responds, but there's there's definitely quite a lot of concern that conspiracy theories on the rise. It's difficult for me to say. Now, this is somebody who specializes in studying conspiracy theories and their impact, and she says it's difficult for her to say that they're actually increasing, because I don't have the data to support that one way or the other. But I think it is definitely the case that even if we can't say for sure that social media has increased conspiracy theories, it's certainly changed the way in which people access this information. It's much easier for people to find this source of information now, more than it's ever been before. So in some ways, what she's saying is this initial theme of my talk, that conspiracy theories are increasing, how the internet is impacting it, may or may not be true, but they're definitely louder and more accessible, and they sell ad clicks, they sell article space, etc. So in a lot of ways, the name of my talk should be more like In Plain Sight, not the rise of conspiracy theories in the information age, but the continuation of conspiracy theories in the information age. So going back to that original plan for the talk, the current plan for the talk is definitely different. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what general concepts around conspiracy theories, and we'll see why I have to keep it general. Like there's a definite justification for this. I cut out, for the most part, the section that was going to talk about classic conspiracy theories versus modern conspiracy theories, just because there will not be time to go into the hundreds of is it or is it not a conspiracy theory. Who knows? Researchers don't have a definite answer. I'm going to, I guess I probably shouldn't have exited out that entire line, but I'm going to talk, right? Not necessarily, I want to talk some about the misconceptions and the conceptions around conspiracy theories and their believers, but I'll just talk. And then I will show some data, question mark. Okay. And a lot of this change of what this talk was meant to be, or what I conceived it to be and what it became, will deal with three caveats. First caveat, there is a growing body of research about conspiracy theories and their impact, especially in the light of COVID-19, QAnon, the election, all this kind of thing. But when you look at the research about conspiracy theories, what you often see is stuff written in 2018, 2020 will say things like, there is not rigorous research about this aspect of conspiracy theories. It's happening. I think probably in 3 to 5 years you will see a lot more definite psychological, sociological papers on the topic. But for right now, even though there's research and statements about conspiracy theories going back years, I think you're going to see better research. And that sounds bad. That sounds like I'm saying that the research that's out there isn't good. There's a lot of good research on it, but I think you will see more consistent, rigorous research going for all sorts of reasons. Just because, if nothing else, the terms conspiracy theory have been brought heavily to light. So people they don't consider them necessarily quite as fringe as they used to, even though there isn't definite research saying that they are more or less fringe than they used to be. Another caveat that I found is that distinctions can be very tricky, like what counts as a conspiracy theory from person A to person B can be radically different. So the note I have here is that one person's conspiracy theory might be another person's legitimate attempt to explain some inexplicable portion of the universe. And we're going to see that a lot, especially towards the end of this talk, about how much conspiracy theories tie into the same sort of mental energy that scientific endeavors and such involve. And there's also just generally this notion of that a lot of context about conspiracy theories, a lot of discussions about conspiracy theories, frame them in the context of there's this other that is trying to push this, goal, this nefarious end, by manipulating the data. And in a lot of ways, when people talk about conspiracy theorists, the language they use very much so feels like people framing it in the terms of a conspiracy theory, if that makes sense. So any attempt to explain the recent uptick in conspiracy theories, and uptick is in air quotes now, but as a shady non-specific conspiracy itself has many of the same flaws that any other conspiracy theory has. Okay. So now we have to get to sort of the terminology of, we have to start laying some groundwork about what I mean when I say the word conspiracy theory. And it will, this is about to be semantic saturation. I'm going to say this phrase a lot, but what we talk about when we talk about conspiracy theories. So the simple Oxford English Dictionary definition is the theory that an event or phenomenon occurs as a result of a conspiracy between interested parties. Pretty simple, right? It's a statement of a conspiracy that causes something to happen. Specifically, a belief that some covert but influential agency, typically political motivation, impressive and intent, is responsible for an unexplained event. Okay. But as you will see, there's a lot of ways of defining it. Michael Barkin's definition is a lot more detailed and specific. The essence of a conspiracy beliefs lies in an attempt to delineate and explain evil. The locus of evil lies outside of the true community and some other. The result is a worldview characterized by a sharp division between the realms of good and evil, and I have that bolded and in red because this kind of becomes important. It isn't necessarily just an attempt to explain a conspiracy, and as we will see, conspiracies happen, and they are, all the time, and they get outed and et cetera, et cetera. But usually the conspiracy theorist viewpoint is that the person doing the conspiracy is doing it with a very, it's like on black and white, good and evil lines. So for our purposes, a conspiracy belief is the belief that an organization made up of individuals or groups was or is acting covertly to achieve some malevolent end. A conspiracist worldview implies a universe governed by design rather than randomness. So it's not that bad things happen to good people, it's that bad things happen because bad people cause them to happen. Okay, so take that definition, Barkin's definition, and contrast it to Claire Burchell's slightly more forgiving definition. By conspiracy theory, I initially meant a narrative to explain an event or a series of events to be the result of a group of people working in secret for a nefarious end. Same basic thing. But then she says that we often associate the signifier conspiracy theory with apparently crazy internet rants, and it's important to keep in mind the truism: just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Conspiracies do happen. The relationship between conspiracy theory and, say, investigative journalism, between conspiracy theory and the theories of conspiracy, must be thought of on a continuum. Any distinction we might set up at this point will later prove unsustainable. Or to sum up, to sum up this issue, Brian Keeley says it best: the definition of a conspiracy theory poses unexpected difficulties. So, with this in mind, I thought, okay, so how do I demonstrate live that there's this issue with defining what is or isn't a conspiracy theory? So I come up with this really brief alternate belief check-in slide, and it's just like, some of these are actual conspiracies, some are just sort of fun alternate beliefs, some are very much so like a conspiracy theory but have a slightly different mechanism. It's like the government suppressing green energy, poison Halloween candy, the Bohemian Grove stuff. Do you believe in homeopathy, JFK assassination? Do you think that's the official story is true? Astrology, the zodiac. I'm hiding one of the words because I didn't move it over properly, but it was just luck. Like, do you believe in luck? Do you have any sort of little lucky rituals you have? Because going back to that notion that, one person's conspiracy theory can be another person's attempt to explain the inexplicable universe, a lot of these have that vibe. If you believe in luck, if you believe that rubbing a penny before going to a job interview is going to increase your chance of a job interview, you are attempting to add order to a chaotic universe, whether or not there's any scientific basis behind it. So if it's hard to really define a conspiracy theory, it can be easier, ironically, to sort of define certain things that a conspiracy theory is not. But in the context of this talk, conspiracy theory is not just a theory of a conspiracy. And that sounds like academic nonsense. But generally speaking, what I mean is the kind of conspiracy theories I'm talking about isn't just us sitting around and talking about some conspiracy that happened. Like, I'm talking about a fairly specific type of conspiracy theory. And related to that, conspiracy theories are not always all wrong. And again, that seems like a weird double negative, but it's kind of hard to phrase it otherwise. Generally speaking, just keep in mind throughout this thing that conspiracies do happen. In the 20th century, we saw MK Ultra, Echelon, the Iran-Contra affair. We saw Project Mockingbird. We saw oil companies hiding the known environmental impact of oil and spending lots of money to do it. We saw big tobacco spending lots of money to hide the known cancerous aspects of tobacco products. We even saw things like the government poisoning like alcohol during Prohibition, which resulted in a number of deaths. There have been multiple conspiracies in the last 100 years that have been outed and documented, and this is a partial list. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment, plenty of other medical cover-ups and data manipulation, stock market manipulation, CIA and FBI infiltrations, assassinations, coups, all sorts of things definitely fit in the definition of a conspiracy. But here's the thing: when we get these, when we get these conspiracies that exist and get outed, that's that's kind of the point, right? That a lot of these conspiracies existed and collapsed as a conspiracy. They had definite documented proof that showed what was going on, and there has been researchers, one of which is the David Grimes here that I referenced, that have pointed out that if you take how long these actual conspiracies like MK Ultra, or I guess these documented conspiracies like MK Ultra, and you take how long they lasted before they collapsed because of some whistleblower or because of some oversight committee or because members just decided to move out into the open, and you compare that to the sort of conspiracies that a lot of current conspiracy theories look at, you will see that for something like the number of people involved in faking the moon landing and maintaining, like sustaining that conspiracy, by his calculations, it would take about 4 years before someone just mentioned it to the press. If you took something like climate change with all the possible scientists, all the possible scientific bodies, you're looking about 4 years before climate change was proven to be a complete hoax. Vaccination's kind of the same way. Like if you looked at these tight little bodies of people, the conspiracy can last a long time. If you got a conspiracy of 3 or 4 people, they can maintain that indefinitely, decades, potentially to their death. And presumably the vast majority of conspiracies in the history of mankind have been exactly that pattern. But if you start talking about 100 people, 1,000 people, it's like the inverse square ratio sort of thing. The more people you have in on a secret, the much more difficult to keep that secret. So when you look at this sort of, conspiracies do happen, you do have to keep in mind that we know that because these conspiracies have openly collapsed, and usually in only a matter of a couple of years. A big important thing that I came across while doing lots of research on this is that conspiracy theories are not exclusive to one another. And I didn't include this, but this actually includes that people can maintain conflicting conspiracy theories. You can believe that scientists are too dumb to get to the moon, but also too smart, or smart enough to hide data, right? You can believe things that are technically in opposition to each other at the same time. In fact, researchers found that basically one of the believing in a conspiracy theory makes you susceptible to other conspiracy theory beliefs. And this is a quote, one of the quotes that I came across is, the single best predictor of belief in one conspiracy theory is belief in a different conspiracy theory. And I've got other articles that basically come to the same conclusion right there in the citations. So like once people become a believer in a certain type of conspiratorial ideation, then they are susceptible to other flavors of different and potentially conflicting ideations. And this makes sense. I don't know how well this slide shows up, but so because a lot of conspiracy theories have very similar DNA, as you would. So like if you take something that seems completely unrelated, like aliens are real, COVID's man-made, certain things like the government's lying to you, your family's in danger, scientists are either wrong or lying, those things will be the same in both basic bodies. So once you come to the conclusion that the government's made up of liars, or that the scientists are either dumb or lying, to prove one of them, then the other one you've already done a good chunk of the groundwork. So going back to that alternate belief check-in, what you see is patterns of some people who believe some of these things usually believe other things. It primes the brain kind of thing. And just because you like to read your horoscope doesn't mean you're going to be a definite anti-vaxxer. But you do see this instance of people who engage in some sort of alternate belief sort of thing, like Gamergate. Members of Gamergate were targeted by certain right-wing organizations. You have sort of the vegan lifestyle blogger, the pastel QAnon, as they were called, were kind of targeted and brought into these other protests. You see these collections coming together, but it does kind of go back to the caveat I have above. Like, I'm not saying that there's a shady background organizations that are targeting people and bringing them in, because that gets into conspiratorial talk as it is. But updating that 3-point, that caveat 3 about the great paradox, one of the things is you do have a great paradox, which is, what if someone uses this mental aspect of people The both sides paradox conspiracy to actually gain someone through nefarious ends. Like, what if there is a conspiracy to take advantage of conspiracies? I'm not saying there is. I'm just saying this is a potential problem you'd have to deal with. That if people use the language of anti-conspiracy theories to bring people into conspiracy theories, it could be a technical problem. And a potentially important thing is conspiracy theories are not necessarily harmless. Some of them are, but they're not necessarily harmless. Even when some aspects of conspiracy theories are positive, things like increased oversight, holding authority accountable, etc., etc. And there's lots of research on this, but some of the specific elements of harm could be things like evaluation becomes more emotional and logical. You get increased distrust in science, increased distrust in authority. You start seeing people's social interactions degrade. People start avoiding medical intervention. You get just general avoidance of effective positive change. If you think that there is a nefarious core group manipulating your life, you're not necessarily going to do good things in your life to make things better. And even outside of these sort of generalized concepts, you have plenty of specific instances of negative impacts in conspiracy theories. You had the guy who shot up the pizza joint. You've got increased of Jewish American violence, or violence against Jewish American. You got increased anti-Asian violence. You get, the guy who wanted to prove the Earth was flat, so he built up a balloon and he died from the experiment, kind of thing. You get lots of things like this. And even if you're saying, well, okay, that's not. I mean, these are specific instances. I mean, you get massive instances where you take something like the Protocols of the Elder Zion and combine that with Henry Ford's newspaper, like Henry Ford as in the guy known as the big American industrialist and big American hero. And so you get these, one's a hoax about the evils of the Jewish people, and the other is, it's not necessarily a hoax, it's just badly anecdotal evidence with heavy bias published as a regular kind of article in this, somewhat prominent newspaper. And you get these two things, basically both buying a conspiracy. One, people believing the anti-Jewish conspiracy enough that they just straight up lied about it, and the other, people so biased against Jewish people that they were willing to just toss whatever into the wind and see what stuck. And like, these things get cited by the Nazi Party as evidence that what they're doing is right. We're talking about millions of deaths because of what essentially becomes a conspiracy theory and other things. So in this kind of final big section of this talk, as I was doing all this research and all of this yay and nay, what is and isn't a conspiracy theory, and does this one thing, conspiracy theory I wanted to talk about, even count as a conspiracy theory by technical definitions, what I did find is there are certain pillars of conspiracy belief. Like, there's certain structures that over and over again research shows up. So I figured, if my original idea of a talk about looking at hyper-specific data doesn't necessarily work, I will look at kind of the general data and just increase the language out there that we can have to talk about this. So UNESCO and some other agencies put together this infographic, the conspiracy theories, what are they, how do they flourish, kind of thing, and they identified 6 things. And you'll see this sort of language show up in a lot of the data. A belief in a secret plot, a group of conspirators, evidence, and the quotes there is from them, that seems to suggest proof of this plot, belief that everything is connected and nothing happens by accident. And this is where I think you're taking something that's just sort of like a theory of a conspiracy and getting to a conspiracy theory. Like, once you get past the notion of there is a conspiracy and there are conspirators, but when you take that to, because everything happens for a reason, And 5 here, the world's dividing into evil. Everything happens for a reason, and those reasons are good and evil. This is when you're getting into what I'm talking about when I say a conspiracy theory. It's not just a belief that people do things together for a specific end. It's the fact that they believe that the end is specifically good and evil, and there are no accidents. And then usually the outcome of conspiracy theories is to identify these sort of outgroups and to scapegoat them. And related to that, you have Justice Walker's 4 enemies and 1 ally, taken from there, the United States of Paranoia. But you have like an enemy outside, which is sort of your classic scapegoat, and the enemy within, which is another classic scapegoat. The enemy above, the enemy below, and then they also identified a sort of 5th prototype conspiracy theory, which is the benevolent conspiracy, the notion that sometimes you have people working behind the scenes to make the world a better place, which is, it happens, but it isn't necessarily what we mean usually when we're talking about conspiracy theory. But the general idea here is usually you have some sort of outside, or I guess what you would refer to as an outgroup force. And that outgroup force may be inside of your society, but they're separated from the rest. They're like usually a sub-tribe, and either this is outside of your civilization, inside your civilization, or you get the above and below. So the enemy above would be things like the elite up above. The enemy below would be like the poor workers planning to overthrow the government. But in general, like when you look at this language, the language tends to use reification, like the sense of describe an entire group of people as a single unit, and then use negative terminology to describe these people. So it's not, Johnny over here who's plotting to overthrow the government. It's the workers. It's not Austin over here who is, a senator. It's like the elite. It's not Frank over there who is someone from Europe who has anti-American sentiments. It's like the globalist. And you see that kind of language where the enemy usually gets defined as a outsider, even if they're technically an insider, and they tend to get defined as a collective. In the simplest terms, most conspiracy theories break down to just simply us versus them, in which us is almost entirely described in good terms, while them is almost entirely described in evil terms. This quote from Maria Chiansky and others basically says, research based on social identity tradition has long suggested that individuals have a psychological immune system that helps them to see their group and its actions in a positive light, especially in the situations of moral ambiguity and intergroup conflict. In particular, research has shown that group members may adopt various cognitive strategies that allow them to interpret reality in a manner that protects collective self-integrity and self-esteem, which I think is ultimately the big end game of a lot of conspiracy theories. It's a way of saying this group of people are correct, right, good. That group of people are bad, evil, conniving, sneaky, incorrect, and they're attacking us. Like it establishes human affairs as a tribal identity. Conspiracy theories resist falsification. So if someone says, I believe X, and you say there's no evidence for X, or if you say I do not agree with X because here's some evidence against X, if they're in conspiracy theory ideation mode, like they strong belief, anything you throw at them can be interpreted technically as proof of a conspiracy. It's a sort of paradox, if you would. Brian Keeley, who I quoted earlier, has another great quote, which is, this is one of the most curious features of these theories. To my knowledge, conspiracy theories are the only theory for which evidence against them is actually construed as evidence in favor of them. The more evidence piled up by the authorities in favor of a given theory, the more the conspiracy theories point out how badly they must want us to believe the official stories. And this is one of the legitimate issues with conspiracy theories, because as I'll go into, there's a lot of positive, just natural aspects to them, but one of the problems is when it becomes a line that people draw in the sand and refuse to engage with. Generally speaking, a lot of research, I include 3, but honestly, if you dig more and more and more, you'll find this is a theme that shows up in a lot of different research about conspiracy theories. A lot of conspiracy theories are an emotional explanation that sometimes kind of is staged as a logical one, but generally comes from an emotional place. I am smart. Everything happens for a reason. I'm smarter than the scientists who are trying to trick me. My alienation, my anxiety is justified because the world has order, but they're trying to convince us the world's disorderly and we're fighting back. I am right to distrust those different from me. My tribe is the best tribe, and these other tribes are trying to trick us using old school tricks, But, I am right it shows up a lot. But it's important to note that conspiracy theory, the emotional context of it, isn't guaranteed positive versus, it's not like, oh, it's just they think they're right, that's why they believe in conspiracy theories. This is just smugness, because this is how a fair chunk of academic research aimed at conspiracy theorists, this is how they try to frame it, like, oh, these are just dumb people who think they're smart and so they can believe in conspiracy theories. It's not that simple. It's sort of like an anxious reaction to the world, right? Like it's trying to understand things that are kind of not understandable. So a lot of times the emotions around a conspiracy theory are simultaneously negative and positive, and those two things intertwine. Like they're not easy to pull apart. The belief that you have found proof that the authorities are doing something nefarious might be a sort of positive, I figured it out kind of thing, but it's also very negative because people much more powerfully than you are doing things. So, here's another quote. Under these circumstances, those with a high need for cognitive closure can reject any salient conspiracy theories. Nevertheless, when the situation is complex and uncertain, conspiracy beliefs may serve as a map of meaning for those individuals who are determined to get any answer. Under these circumstances, individuals high in need for cognitive closure are likely to seize on salient conspiratorial explanations. In other words, those high in need of cognitive closure rely on the easily accessible schema for conspiracy theory. We suggest in this case conspiracy theories which represent closed, certain, structured modes of thinking would serve to provide closure and certainty. Other words, sometimes when people are just in disarray, putting things in array, even when that ultimately is sort of a negative outcome because it means you're embracing that there are evil, chaotic forces, it can have a it can fill an emotional need. And related to that, here's another thing. In fact, it's estimated 80% of conversations are about other human beings. Hominins likely were required to form bands as a way to ensure survival. The greatest threats came not only from predators, but I would even say not from predators, but other bands. Thus, in order to ensure Group A alliance as a defense against others, constant gossip served as a way to cement bonds. It is thus expected, when considering the cause of particular health problems, human beings will always have the inclination to talk about other human beings in relation to these problems. So essentially, when you have any problem, in this case, it's talking about something like, conspiracies around viruses. But in general, when you have any sort of issue, research suggests that people look to other people to blame. In a lot of ways, we're primed by evolution, by biology, to be conspiratorial in thought. When something bad happens, we look to who caused it to happen or who we can assign blame to. And this is, one of the last quotes of the talk, but it's The Paranoid Style in American Politics by Richard Hofstadter is sort of one of those central papers about conspiracy theories that gets quoted a lot throughout a lot of research. But what he says in this is the enemy is clearly delineated. He is a perfect model of malice, a kind of amoral Superman, sinister, ubiquitous, powerful, cruel, sensual, luxury-loving. And unlike the rest of us, the enemy is not caught in the toils of the vast mechanism of history. Himself a victim of his past, his desires, his limitation. He wills, indeed he manufactures the mechanism of history, or he tries to deflect the normal course of history in an evil way. The paranoids, and in his language, the paranoid would be the conspiracy theorist. Interpretation of history is distinctly personal. Decisive events are not taken as part of the stream of history, but as the consequences of someone's will. Again, it's that natural, emotional, evolutionary response to assign a face to disorder. So broadly, just to sort of wrap things up, so what is to be done? And that's a very complicated thing, and there's a lot of complicated answers depending on how much the researcher really believes that conspiracy theories are on the rise, they're really harmful, etc. So just my general take, based on going through dozens and dozens of articles and things about, the supposed rise, which may be more of a continuation of conspiracy theories, we need to increase the research. Step one. Step two, we need to have empathy, the reasons behind the mindset, and we basically have to appreciate the commonality of alienation and anxiety, which is at the heart of conspiracy theories, because time and time in history, when you get these high points of conspiracy theory and rumors, gossip, and all those things that are related, it's usually at times kind of like what we're at right now, where you got diseases, you have poverty, you have rising costs and inflation, you have various entities moving in non-specific, non-open ways, and a lot of people are tense. And so when a lot of people get tense, they start kind of building these tribes. They start trying to figure out how the other tribe is to blame. And plot twist, the answer might be there is no other tribe to blame. We're technically all in this together and just as confused as everyone else. But if we don't think of it that way, if we think of it as I'm anxious and someone's doing this to me, then you start beginning conspiratorial ideation. And in that way, I think we do have to try to avoid using the same sort of flawed logic that the people that engage in conspiracy theories use. Like, we can't go, well, the conspiracy theorists are evil people out to do some end, because then a lot of times our conversation, like our framework, is the same framework that we're criticizing them for using. In that way, we have to move away from the us, them, good, evil language patterns. And I put there, both sides is weak sauce. Like, we can't necessarily put this as a conversation of you have point A and point B, and the only way to really duke it out is to put them together and have them fight it out in some sort of ring of ideas. It doesn't work like that. There's near infinite possible truths, right? There's near infinite possible interpretations. We can't frame this as a and B, and we especially can't frame this as they're the bad guys and I'm the good guys. Even though there are plenty of people who do very bad things, we can't use the language of this entire group of people is negative and this entire group of people is positive. I think that's the same language that causes conspiratorial belief to become such a burden and problem. We need to encourage open government, open science, open internet, open technology. The more stuff's out in the open, the harder it is to believe that there's a shady underside. And I know this is an academic pipe dream, that's fine. We need to disrupt sources of information that actually feed off people's fears. Back to that caveat 3.5, that if someone was actually to take advantage of the conspiratorial belief patterns and hide behind the concept of like, oh, so you're saying there's a conspiracy. If you take that away, like, you actually have to go after this. You have to stop these sort of automatic machinations of the internet to allow certain people to feed and prosper and make money off of other people's suffering. I'm not going to go into details about who I think is doing it or to what end I think they're doing it. I'm just saying that this is one of those things you have to take out potential bad actors who are trying to make a quick profit, not some grand evil end, but just usually quick profit. And you have to protect those people that are common targets. Time and time again, you see like immigrants, Jewish people, like Asian Americans, you see academics and scientists, you see various people who time and time again become the target of a conspiratorial belief, like people who attack certain subgroups because they think that they're standing up for good, which is why it's always dangerous to think in terms of good versus evil, because if ultimately that group is evil, it is okay to write an entire manifesto, whole cloth, pretend it's from that subgroup, and use that to justify violence against millions of them by going, well, they really are evil. So if I made this up, what does it matter? But in general, like as a society, we need to come up with protections to protect people that would be the targets of conspiracy theories. In both cases, both people who would be targets of violence inspired by conspiracy theories and people who would be likely targets for conspiracy theory ideation. So that basically wraps up my talk. And as you can see, we can go all the way back to that first slide. It is massively different than my initial scale. But in some ways, this is one of those things that it's time to start talking about it. It's time to start getting ideas and conversations out there. But we may be a long way off before we can say anything with absolute anything absolutely definite. If there are any questions, the only